just one key point I really think people miss with contract management is everyone thinks contract management happens once you've signed the contract. And both of us always use the language pre-signature or post-signature or contract management, because the pre-signature stage, I think, let's get straight. We're talking about subcontracting effectively. We're talking about the procurement process, and contract management is the last bit of the procurement cycle, as most typical designation bodies would put it. But there's a lot of activities that need to happen pre-signature to enable the post-signature contract management. And this is what infuriates me, is that people just don't do this. And like you say, getting the relevant stakeholders together to maybe create the requirement, to create the right strategy, get the right legal documents in place, just doesn't seem to happen. It all seems to happen just before the contract's going to get signed. And then you realize
it's like a checkbox activity.
Yeah.
it's like a checkbox activity.
Yeah.
So we need to have a contract. So let's get into a contract. And that's all that's happening out there. And one other piece that I've seen, Daniel, is most organizations, like, they have a threshold when a contract needs to be put in place, right?
Yeah.
And they don't seem to have a control on the threshold at all.
Yeah.
Somebody's sitting and looking at each purchase order to see which one went over. And then basis if it went over that threshold, then a contract needs to be in place. They kidnap the purchase order so that they won't release it until the contract is signed. So that is like a post-mortem. Like, you need to have checks and balances where it'll allow you to, you need to know at least 200 or 25%. When you're reaching 25% of the threshold, there should be a trigger saying that, buddy, get ready with the contract because we're hitting the threshold. That's a nice way to do work. As opposed to somebody needs something, the purchase order is out, and you're trying to create a contract.
Backpedal on it. That's a really good point. I was just thinking as you were saying that, because one organization I worked at, they would issue a standard purchase order with just a few terms on the back of it, effectively. That you release it through Oracle, it goes out. But the trigger points, there was 2 trigger points. One was 25,000, from memory this is, and one was 50. And they're actually quite small amounts for the amount of money that organization spent, which wasn't good because it meant everything needed a big contract, which was frustrating. But it was almost quite a and I think it always is quite an arbitrary figure to just say, oh, at this point you need this type of contract, at this point you need this type of contract, when you're only thinking about it from a monetary perspective. Because I've dealt with procurements that are for 10K, which for the organization was pennies. Some places that might be a lot. But the point I want to make is the complexity element, in that procurement actually had a lot of intellectual property as part of it. Even though it was £10,000, the rights and the intellectual property rights that were being exchanged or licensed made it far more complex. But if we say use the other example of actually 25 grand I needed to actually have a decent contract, I could have just issued it out on standard purchase order terms that wouldn't fit the order. So I think if you have that good pre-signature contract management phase and you're aware of these things, because intellectual property rights, managing them is going to be a key part of the contract management phase.
Absolutely.
You need to actually build this contract a lot better than just standard PO terms that might say, you give us this much, we give you this, you deliver whatever. They're really basic sort of terminology in those contracts.
And we shouldn't forget, for instance, we got a bunch of radioactive waste. Okay, a bag full of it. And it's going to, someone can just tie it in a plastic bag and throw it out. Right? If you want someone to dispose it. So you cannot issue it on a purchase order for sure, even though it's £1,000. We need a contract for that because we don't want to be in a lawsuit. If he puts it in the neighborhood jungle or wherever, so all the animals die. Like that.
Definitely. I'm with you. Actually, the place I'm talking about, I mean, I'm not going to name them, but it was in the nuclear industry. So I was having to deal with not quite like that, but there's the cowboy element and the maverick element of actually this doesn't cost much. We can just get any old supplier in to do it. Was a big no-no because there was so much more to it. Like, and examples that you just said, I mean, it's a bit tongue in cheek, but I've seen things that aren't too far off from that, and it's scary. And that's because people don't think about the contracts, the way everything needs to be set up, the regulations, the laws that you have to apply to. If they don't have a decent process in place that enables you to use the right people to think about this.
Absolutely. And talking about the radioactive waste, so my first role was me being a category lead for environmental services.
Okay.
So I used to help with recycling, water treatment, and remediation of a big chemical company. So it was a lot of work. I had such a wonderful experience sitting, going to the US, sitting with the guys who do it on the ground. They took pictures of what kind of truck it goes in, all that. So it's always really awesome when I heard that. And I'll tell you a nice story there. Okay? So I worked in that organization for close to 4 years.
Yeah.
And right from the time I was there, I think 2.5 years in, we celebrated a particular contract being signed by cutting a cake, because it took 2.5 years for it to be signed.
Wow.
That's how complex the negotiation cycle was.
Yeah.
Right, because that's another area that I see that we spend a lot. Maybe radioactive waste maybe it does make sense, but we'll have to figure a way, a middle ground or something. Be prepared enough. Imagine 2.5 years, we've changed so many hands. The person is left.
Yeah.
From the supplier side as well as our side. So we'll have to definitely look at making it more structured, or there should be a level of preparedness on the contract side. I know on the sourcing side, there's a lot of tools and negotiation tactics and things like that. But the contract is kind of a niche, right? On the clause level, like an indemnity clause or a patent or whatever clause that you're looking at. So there should be some level of preparedness. And I'm seeing one organization who has like 5 lawyers. 5 lawyers negotiate that clause in 5 different ways.